Curious Owl here, and today I am bringing you my review for the book Desperation by Stephen King. Now, this is something that I've been meaning to read for a long time. It was my random TBR pick for May, and I know this video is going up in June, but I did end up finishing this actually with 30 minutes to spare on May 31st. I was so proud of myself, and I gotta say, this was way better than I had ever expected it to be. I thought that this was going to be a really hard story to get through, and it was, but not for the reasons that I had originally thought. This follows several different people as they are taken into this town called Desperation, Nevada, that is essentially completely deserted. There are several different characters who are taken in by this deranged cop into the city, and they find out that the entire town has been obliterated, people are dead everywhere, all kinds of animals are going crazy around the town, and they have no idea as to why and have to try to not only escape this city, but also try to figure out what exactly is going on that has caused all of this mayhem and this disaster to happen. One of the very first things that I want to talk about with this book is that it gets very intense very quickly. It's not even within the first 50 pages that we get a really intense scene with this cop and a couple that are in the beginning of the story. It just goes right from the get-go with the intensity and with the suspense and horror and all kinds of really graphic elements that Stephen King has been really known for. I honestly think that if you are into things like horror or suspense movies and you're looking to get into Stephen King, that this is a really good one to start with. I would say that it is another one, but I've not read it and I absolutely refuse to read it because I am so terrified of clowns and I don't want to see the movie. So this, I think, would be another really good one to start with because it has all of those very horror-filled and suspense-filled elements that really good horror and suspense movies have, but it doesn't oversaturate it in any way. What's really funny about this book, though, is that it's got kind of a zombie apocalypse thing going on, but without the zombies, if you get what I mean. Everything is so dire, and in this town, things, are completely destroyed, like it would have been if there was a zombie apocalypse that came running through, but there's no zombies, and it's just one of the funniest things I think about when thinking about how this book made me feel. I will say, though, that because of all of these suspense and the horror that is built within this book, that there are a lot of very slow points in this book, and it kind of made for the story to drag a little bit too much in my opinion. I think that there were definitely a lot of scenes that could have been cut or condensed in a lot of ways to help with picking up the pace a little bit in some very important parts, but I still do really think that the plot was overall really enjoyable and very interesting as it touches on a lot of different ideas about religion and beliefs of religion. There's this whole idea of a cruel God versus a merciful God that plays into this story, as there is a character who essentially kind of comes into his religion based on a prior event, and he uses that to his advantage throughout the story, and there's a huge conversation about the idea of God being either cruel or merciful or even both, and it's a really interesting conversation that I didn't realize would be brought up in this kind of a book, but I think really played into the overall story and lore building that was kind of within this book as well, so I really enjoyed that aspect. But that is one thing I know from reading other reviews of this book from other people that a lot of people struggled with was the overall message of the religion of Christianity and things of that nature. A lot of people thought it was really oversaturated in this book, but I actually really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a really interesting conversation that we can start up as a community in terms of how does that play out and how can we continue to have that play out in other novels similar to this. It also plays on a lot of ideas about destiny and the idea of God's plan for different individuals, because there's a lot that goes on in this novel dealing with those kinds of things with different characters and with essentially the entire reason that these people are in this town in the first place. And so it really also includes kind of ideas of who has to live and who has to die in order for the story to continue. And I think a lot of people could say that that's kind of a way to just kill off certain characters. And while I would agree with that being a possible tactic of Stephen King's, I think that it mostly is being used in the religious sense of trying to start a conversation about the idea of God's plan and what he has in store for other people in this kind of situation, or exactly what he has in store for people in general, those especially that believe in God and believe in Christianity and things of that nature. The one thing I will say about this plot, though, that I really struggled with was the fact that by the end of the book, I still had a lot of unanswered questions in regards to some of the events and things that kind of happen in this novel. For instance, there is this strange entity that is brought up within this novel and is discussed and talked about throughout the novel, but there's no clear idea as to where it comes from, if it was like a Native American spirit, if it was something alien, something much darker, and I don't know if that's because it hasn't been really explored enough. I know that the same entity comes up in another book of Stephen King's, The Regulators, and I did do some research, and it turns out that the entity is still really important in that one, and it goes into more of the idea of what the entity is and what it can do. But I still don't understand where it comes from. So if any of you have read Desperation yourselves and have any knowledge on it without spoiling anything in terms of what the content of this book or The Regulators goes into, please let me know down in the comments below, because I'm still very confused on where this entity that they discuss comes from exactly. Now I'm going to move into some of the characters that are within this novel, because I, for the most part, really enjoyed a lot of the characters that were in this novel, but there was one that I really don't think should have been incorporated, and I think she could have been honestly completely left out of the story, and I just don't really see much of a point to her other than that she provided some good humor. So first we have the Jacksons, who are Peter and Mary Jackson. They are a married couple that goes out to Oregon to pick up Peter's sister's car to take all the way back to their home of New York City, as they are essentially helping Peter's sister move. And they are stopped by the cop named Collie Atragian, who is the biggest cop in Desperation. He thinks he's all that in a bag of chips, and he's basically the one that brings everyone into this town of Desperation. He stops them at first because he says that their license plate has been missing off of their car, and stating that it's possible that some hooligans from the next town over have stolen it, and was basically going to let them go until they find some pot in the trunk of the car. Because of that, he decides to take them into Desperation, and this is kind of where the story really kicks off, because then we find other characters and learn their backstory and their ideas and things of why they kind of got to where they are. Then we have the family of Carvers, which consists of Ralph, Ellen, 11-year-old David, and 6 or 7-year-old Kirsten. I think she's no older than 7, but I can't remember quite now what the exact age is. They are just a normal American family from Wentworth, Ohio, going out to Lake Tahoe for a family vacation when they get stopped by Collie when he tells them that there is some strange, crazy man out on the loose and he has to try to protect them, and takes them into Desperation. Then we have John Marinville, who is a very famous writer. I would assume literary fiction writer. That's kind of the vibe I got from him, as more of a literary fiction kind of a person. And he is taken into Desperation when Collie finds him on the side of the road peeing, and then somehow finds pot in his knapsack that is hanging on his motorcycle. Then there is Steve Ames, who doesn't necessarily get dragged into Desperation, more so that he actually goes into Desperation, as he is essentially John Marinville's roadie of sorts, as John is going through the United States to start working on a book and do some talks here and there. Steve's kind of like his roadie slash bodyguard kind of guy, and when John tells him that he is being taken into Desperation, he goes out there to try and find Johnny and try to get him out of there. Then there's the character Cynthia, who is kind of this random character that just literally shows up on the side of the road, and I don't really know what her purpose is throughout this whole thing. She's just a random hitchhiker that Steve picks up on the side of the road, and this is the character I feel like that doesn't have any purpose throughout this story, because all she's literally good for is to provide humor and banter with Steve, and I really don't understand why she was involved with this story, because she literally does nothing throughout this entire book. The other problem that I really had with this story in terms of the characters, and kind of going back to a little bit of plot building, is that the perspective changes throughout the novel are really hard to determine, because literally each section can be from different perspectives from each character. The 3 most main perspectives, though, are from the 11-year-old David Carver, John Marinville, and then usually the entity that is being described in this story. Those are the 3 main people that we see a lot of stuff from in this book, but then every other character also has their own perspectives on the entire situation. Now, I really like that. I do like multiple perspective stories, especially when things are kind of going in a chronological order, where there's not really the same different characters talking about the same situation 50 times over. But the problem that I have with it is that the perspective changes were not clear. You don't know who is talking until you get several paragraphs through the section that this character is talking through, and it makes it a little harder to understand kind of where you are in the story because of that. So I wish that there would have been a little bit more clear transitions between characters and some kind of recognition of which character we are speaking with at the very beginning, whether it was a name at the beginning of the section or some kind of idea as to making it easier for us to, as a reader, to understand which character we are looking from. Overall, though, Desperation by Stephen King was really, really interesting, and if you guys can tell, a lot of the second half of the book, I stopped tabbing certain things because I was so enraptured with the story as I got through about halfway through the book that it made it almost impossible for me to remember to actually tab things that were really, really interesting or really funny. A lot of this book was tabs of green because there were a lot of really disgusting parts, as is normal with horror and gore and thriller kinds of stories. A lot of yellows because of really suspenseful elements or things that really surprised me. A lot of blue because there is some things that are really, really sad that come up in terms of the characters' backstories, and some things that happened towards the very end were really, really sad in terms of like how the ending was. But overall, it was really, really interesting. I really was on an emotional roller coaster throughout this whole book, and I really enjoyed a lot of the different elements that were played into it. So overall, I ended up giving Desperation by Stephen King a 4 out of 5 stars. There definitely was a lot of things that I think could have been done better, and there were some things though that I really, really enjoyed, and I would recommend this to anyone looking to get into Stephen King, and especially those of you who are into horror, thriller kinds of movies and really, really enjoy those kinds of things with storytelling. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this review of Desperation. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!